Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western Literary Canon out loud. Today we are finishing up Journal Collection number 39 by Emerson, obviously, and we are in the sort of middle of the year, I'd say, and he is not on a particular date so much as he's on a particular topic. The topic that we are picking up with him is Bronson Alcott. So, with that said, I will go ahead and get started with that entry. Alcott. Alcott is a certain fluid in which men of a certain spirit can easily expand themselves and swim at large, they who elsewhere found themselves confined. He gives them nothing but themselves. Of course, he seems to them the only wise and great man. But when they meet people of another sort, critics and practical, and are asked concerning Alcott's wisdom, they have no books to open, no doctrines to impart, no sentences or sayings to repeat, and they find it quite impossible to communicate to these their good opinion. Me he has served now these 12 years in that way. He was the reasonable creature to speak to that I wanted. There is in California a gold ore in great abundance, in which the gold is in combination with such elements that no chemistry has yet been able to separate it without great loss. Alcott is a man of unquestionable genius, yet no doctrine or sentence or word or action of his which is excellent can be detached and quoted. He is like Channing, who possesses a painter's eye, an appreciation of form, and especially of color, that is admirable, but who, when he bought pigments and brushes and painted a landscape on a barrel head, could not draw a tree so that his wife could know it was a tree. So Alcott the philosopher has not an opinion or an apothegm to produce. I shall write on his tomb, "Here lies Plato's reader." Read he can with joy and naivete inimitable, and the more the style rises, the more natural and current it seems to him. And yet his appetite is so various that the last book always seems to him the best. Here lies the amateur. The age. Among the marks of the age of cities must be reckoned conspicuously the universal adoption of cash payment. Once it was one of many methods. People bought, but they also borrowed and received much on various claims of goodwill, on hospitality, in the name of God, in the interest of party, of letters, of charity. Young men made essay of their talents for proof, for glory, for enthusiasm, on any reasonable call, nothing doubting that in one or another way their hazard bread would return to them after many days. But now, in the universal expansion of the city by the railroads, the stock exchange infects our country fairs, and no service is thought reasonable which does not see a requital in money. Yet where is the service which can by any dodge escape its remuneration? For grandeur, at least, let us once in a while serve God. Let us sacrifice to the immortal gods. The killers of oxen and sheep did not, in old or later times, but they do who in their action respect a sentiment, and not cash payment. City. Gardner Brewer said to me, "To be a salesman, you must have splendid talents." American literature. We have not had since 10 years a pamphlet which I have saved to bind, and here at last is Bushnell's, and now Henry Thoreau's Ascent of Katahdin. Wisdom is like electricity. I think it is indispensable that we should converse both with our superiors and our inferiors in intellect, with the first for new aim and correction, and with the last for self-possession and talent. C said, quote, "'Tis so many years since we met, and you have passed over such stages." Ah, my friend, I must think so often of Captain Franklin's company in the Arctic regions, traveling laboriously in 6 weeks to the north, and then discovering by observation that they were south of their starting point. The ice had floated, and so with us. Conceit. I notice that people who wash much have a high mind about it and talk down to those who wash little. Carlyle washes, and he has come to believe that the only religion left is ablution, and that Chadwick, the man who is to bring water for the million, is the priest of these times. So at home I find the morning bathers are proud and haughty scorners, and I begin to believe that the composition of water must be 1 part hydrogen and 3 parts conceit. When nature removes a great man, people explore the horizon for a successor. Merchant. In the distribution of lots, the merchant seems to me often enviable. His social position is so good. He mixes with people on a ground so free from all hypocrisy. He has no part to play, but stands on the strength of things. He acquires facility, knowledge of things, knowledge of modes, knowledge of men, knows that which all men gladly hear. Memory. Quote, "It is best knocking in the nail overnight and clenching it in the next morning." Fuller. See St. Augustine's Analysis of Memory, pages 172 to 187 of the Boston edition. Quote, "How they entered into me, let them say if they can, for I have gone over all the avenues of my flesh, and cannot find by which they entered." Page 175. Quote, "The memory is, as it were, the belly of the mind, and joy and sadness, like sweet and bitter food, which when committed to the memory are, as it were, passed into the belly, where they may be stowed, but cannot taste. Ridiculous is it to imagine these to be alike, and yet they are not utterly unlike." Page 177. We remember that we forget. One of the chief faculties which Plato, like other ancient philosophers, proposed to exercise and develop was memory. Then there's an untranslated Greek inscription here. See Clouds Passum and volume 465 and Republic Lib v. Sewell, page 215. The Beatitude of Conversation. I am afraid books do stand in our way, for the best heads are writers, and when they meet and fall into profound conversation, they never quite lose all respect of their own economy, and pour out the divinest wine, but each is a little wary, a little checked by the thought of the rare helps this hour might afford him to some page which he has written. Each is apt to become abstracted, and lose the remark of the other through too much attention to his own. Yet I have no book and no pleasure in life comparable to this. Here I come down to the shore of the sea and dip my hands in its miraculous waves. Here I am assured of the eternity and can spare all omens, all prophecies, all religions, for I see and know that which they obscurely announce. I seem rich with earth and air and heaven, but the next morning I have lost my keys. To escape this economy of writers, women would be better friends, but they have the drawback of the perplexities of sex. 40% of the English people cannot write their names. 1/2 of 1% of the Massachusetts people cannot, and these are probably Britons born. American education tends, I am told, to arithmetic. At least I hear it complained that all the public schools teach arithmetic chiefly. October, last week. Another walk this Saturday afternoon with Ellery through the woods to the shore of Flint's Pond. The witch hazel was in full bloom, and from the highland we saw one of the best pictures of the New Hampshire mountains. But Ellery said that when you come among them they are low, and nothing but cow pastures. I say, let us value the woods, they are full of solicitation. My wood lot has no price. I could not think of selling it for the money I gave for it. It is full of unknown mysterious values. What forms, what colors, what powers, null, it is true, to our ignorance, but opening inestimably to human wit. The crows filled the landscape with a savage sound. The ground was covered with new fallen leaves, which rustled so loud as we trampled through them that we could hear nothing else. One thing our Concord once, a Berkshire brook which falls, and now beside the road, and now under it, cheers the traveler for miles with its loud voice. Channing asks whether the mullein is in England. I do not remember it. It is so conspicuous in our pastures with its architectural spire, especially where it grows with the pokeweed and the ruined shanties of the Irish in my woods. that it must not be forgotten. Channing celebrates Herrick as the best of English poets, a true Greek in England, a great deal better poet than Milton, who, he says, is too much like Dr. Channing. I think that the landscape before us would give Herrick all he needed. He who sung a cherry, Julia's hair, Netherby's pimple, his own hen Partlet, and Ben Jonson. We have a wider variety here among the maples, but the prose and the poetry of that age was more solid and cordial than ours. I find myself always admiring single twigs and leaves of that tree, and for a chance example, found in Wood's Athena, Oxyonzes, Volume 1, page 225, a quotation from Edmund Campion's History of Ireland, that was a proof of the wit of that age. Germany. How impossible to find Germany! Our young men went to the Rhine to find the genius which had charmed them, and it was not there. They hunted it in Heidelberg, in Göttingen, in Halle, in Berlin. No one knew where it was. From Vienna to the frontier it was not found, and they very slowly and mournfully learned that in the speaking it had escaped, and as it had charmed them in Boston, they must return and look for it there. History, community. Better that races should perish, if thereby a new principle be taught. All the world may well be bankrupt if they are driven so into a right socialism. It is necessary that you should know the people's facts. If you have no place for them, the people absolutely have no place for you. You may prove your theory by all syllogisms and all symbols, but heaven and earth, the constitution of things, is on the people's side, and that is a reason not liable to a fallacy. In politics, all are dilettanti. No man makes a duty there, but he votes on a magnified whim. Our politics are an affectation. 'Tis plain that our people will vote for him who gives them rum. Polk and Cass stand nearer to the barrel than Webster, Clay, or Taylor possibly can. Love is necessary to the righting the estate of woman in this world. Otherwise, nature itself seems to be in conspiracy against her dignity and welfare, for the cultivated, high-thoughted, beauty-loving, saintly woman finds herself unconsciously desired for her sex, and even enhancing the appetite of her savage pursuers by these fine ornaments she has piously laid on herself. She finds with indignation that she is herself a snare, and was made such. I do not wonder at her occasional protest, violent protest against nature, in fleeing to nunneries, and taking black veils. Love rights all this deep wrong. I find out in an instant if my companion does not want me. I cannot comprehend how my visitor does not perceive that I do not want him. It is his business to find out that I, of course, must be civil. It is for him to offer to go. I certainly shall not long resist. I must pardon much to English exclusiveness when I see how life is lost by the swainishness of our fellows. Athene Oxyensis. In the article George Peele, Wood writes, quote, "This person was living in his middle age in the latter end of Queen Elizabeth, but when or where he died I cannot tell. For so it is, and always hath been, that most poets die poor, and consequently obscurely, and a hard matter it is to trace them to their graves." Books are worth reading that sketch a principle as lectures are. All others are tickings of a clock, and we have so much less time to live, the robbers. Alcott learned to write on the sand and on the snow when paper and pens were dear. His journal must be established. He sits here and plots an invasion of Cambridge Library, which he says has never been reported. He proposes to Thoreau to go down and spend a fortnight there and lay it open to the day. Education. It was a right course which Brisbane indicated when he told me of his visit to Paris. "I went," he said, "to the first men in name and credit in science. I said, 'Is there any man here, for any price, will teach me the principles of music?' I found the learnedest and the science, and put myself diligently down to learn." I believe in the admirableness of art. I expect it to be miraculous, and find it so. The combinations of Gothic building are not now attainable, and the Phidian friezes with reason affect us as the forest does. Universities. The university clings to us. They give a certain mechanical integrity and make it impossible to make a mistake. These men are paid to read, who is benefited by their reading. I wonder the melioration is not more. The one is wise, but he has a great many foolish faces. The men remain ridiculous under the beautiful cap of the sky. Why not Platonized? Why do they not assimilate the arts and natural beauties on which they have fed? October 29th. Yesterday, another walk with Ellery, well worth commemoration, if that were possible. But no pen could write what we saw. It needs the pencils of all the painters that ever existed to aid the description. We went to White Pond, a pretty little Indian basin, lovely now as Walden once was. We could almost see the Sachem in his canoe in a shadowy cove. But making the circuit of the lake on the shore, we came at last to see some marvelous reflections of the colored woods in the water, which held us fast to the effect, almost to the going down of the sun. The water was very slightly rippled, which took the proper character from the pines and birches and a few oaks, which composed the grove, and the submarine wood seemed all made of Lombardy poplar, with such delicious green stained by gleams of mahogany from the oaks, and streaks of white from the birches, every moment growing more excellent. It was the word seen through a prism, and set Ellery on wonderful Lucretian theories of law and design. Ellery, as usual, found the place with excellent judgment. Where your house should be set, leaving the woods paths as they were, which no art could make over, and after leaving the pond and a certain dismal dell, whither a man might go to shoot owls or to do self-murder in, we stuck across an orchard to a steep hill of the right New Hampshire slope, newly cleared of woods, and came presently into rudest woodland landscapes, unknown, undescribed, and hitherto unwalked by us Saturday afternoon professors. The sun was setting behind terraces of pines, disposed in groups unimaginable by Downings, or Loudons, or Capability Browns, but we kept our way and fell into the Dugain trail, as we had already seen the glimpse of his cabin in the edge of the barbarous district we had traversed. Through a clump of apple trees, over a long ridge. Query, what does Dr. Jackson call such ridges? Osars. With fair outside of the river and across the Nut Meadow Brook, we came out upon the banks of the river just below James Brown's. Ellery proposed that we should send the Horticultural Society our notes. Took an apple near the White Pond fork of the Dugain Trail, an apple of the beware of this variety, a true touch me if you dare, or seek no further of this. We had much talk of books and lands and arts and farmers. We saw the original tumulus or first barrow, which the fallen pine tree makes with its upturned roots, and which, after a few years, precisely resembles a man's grave. We talked of the great advantage which he has who can turn a verse over all the human race. I read in Wood's Athene Oxyensis a score of pages of learned nobodies, of whose once odoriferous reputations not a trace remains in the air, and then I came to the name of some Carew, Herrick, Suckling, Chapman, whose name is afresh and modern as those of our friends in Boston and London, and all because they could turn a verse. Only write a dozen lines and rest on your oars forever. You are dear and necessary to the human race, and worth all the old trumpery, Plutarchs and Platos and Bacons of the world. I quoted Suckling's line, quote, "A bee had stung it newly," to praise it, and Ellery said, quote, "Yes, everybody's poetry is good but your own." He declares that the modern books, Tennyson, Carlyle, Landor, gave him no standard, no measure of thought and life, and he fancies that the only writing open for us is the essay. He arrived at 3 rules. 1. That no mercy is to be shown to poetry. 2. None to artist. 3. Lost. I defended Boston people from his charges of bottomless stupidity, by the wit they have shown in these two things I have read today, Fitchburg Road Report and Hale's and Quincy's speeches at the water celebration. What a use is their arithmetic turned to! For $4 millions, and in any street you can pick up 40 men worth 100,000 each, they have in 2 years finished the splendid and durable toy, and strong aqueduct to last forever, running down Snake Brook bed, placed under navigable salt water, and arriving in Boston, feeding every chamber and closet as well as the Frog Pond fountain. And then, by their judicious ciphering, the sale of city lands, new made and rendered available by the water, in the next few years will pay all these 4 millions, and give the water free as it is pure to all. Ellery said he had once fancied that there were some amateur trades, as politics, but he found there were none. These too were fenced by Whig barricades. Even walking could not be done by amateurs, but by professors only. In walking with Ellery you shall always see what was never before shown to the eye of man. And yet for how many ages of lonely days has that pretty wilderness of White Pond received the sun and clouds into its transparency, and woven each day new webs of birch and pine, shooting into wilder angles and more fantastic crossing of these coarse threads, which in the water have such momentary elegance. Socrates. Quote, like those who make a hungry animal follow them by holding up to him a green bough or some fruit, so you, whilst you hold in your hand that roll of paper, could draw me without difficulty to the end of Attica, and farther if you would. Phaedrus, Cousin, page 11, volume 6. Every man is entitled to be measured or characterized by his best influence. Every loafer knows the way to the rum shop, but every angel does not know the way to his nectar. Why can we never learn our proper economy? Every youth and maid should know the road to prophecy as surely as the cook maid to the baker's shop. October 31st. A good deal of thought and reading is no better than smoking, yet we give ourselves airs thereon and not on our cigars. The difference between labor and indolence in the world of thought certainly points at a code and scale of reward as emphatic as the Christian heaven and hell, yet with this difference that inspiration is very coy. It is a finer thing to hold a man by his ears than by his eyes, as the beauty does, but his belly, as the rich man does, by his fears, as the state does. The man whom we have not seen is the rapt lover in whom no regards of self degraded the adorer of the laws. There is a pretension about our gasping dilettanti, and we tax them with imbecility, that if I discovered in an obscure country boy, half-witted perhaps, that his sole pleasure was in finding certain spots of beautiful wilderness, that he had the truest taste in his selection, and it was all his passion and employ, a new Narcissus seeing the reflection of man in nature, and dying of its beauty, must I not respect him? I think the true solace of the philosopher is in the perfections of the law which ruins him. Proud is he that he is a Spartan, and that Sparta can easily spare him. The scholar posts his books, the world is arithmetical. In this numbered system the scholar is a numberer, and so adds nature's soul to nature. The tree Yggdrasil grows, but it grows geometrically. It is not Plato but the world that writes, quote, let none enter but a geometer. Passion is logical as wine is geometrical. What is indispensable to inspiration? Sleep. There are two things both indispensable, sound sleep and the provocation of a good book or a companion. The rules of the game are paramount, and daunt the genius of the best players. Webster does not lead, but always plays a reverential second part to some ancestors, or Whig party, or Constitution, or other primary who is much his inferior, if he had but courage and a calling. Plymouth. Lydian says that when she was a child, her mother never bought any crash, but that kitchen towels and coarse cloths were made from old sails, brought home from her father's vessels, and were called sail towels. Wit in trade. There is no good story in the books to show how much better is wit, liberal wit, in trade than penny wisdom, and yet one would think we should have many. The school text is Thales, who, foreseeing the plenty of olives that would be that year, before the winter was gone, bought up all the oil casks at Miletus and Chios, which he did with little money, and when the time came that many were sought for in haste, he, getting that rates on them he pleased, by this means got together much money. It might be as the orchidist who cuts open the fruit bud of the peach in winter, and observes the black germ. The famous coffee speculation is a good instance, and I should like better to know the true history of that, and the reason of its failure, than to have many volumes of political economy. The wit that elects the site of a new city, finds the mills and a path and true terminus of a new railroad, perceives well where to buy wild land in the western country, judging well where the confluence of streams, the change of soil, climate, or race will make thoroughfares and markets. How nature, to keep her balance true, invented a cat. What a phantasmagoria in these animals! Why is the snake so frightful, which is the line of beauty, and every resemblance to it pleases? See what disgust and horror of a rat, loathsome in its food, loathsome in its form, and a tail which is villainous, formidable by its ferocity. Yet interposed between this horror and the gentler kinds is the cat, a beautiful horror, or a form of many bad qualities, but tempered, and thus strangely inserted as an offset, check, and temperament to that ugly horror. See then the squirrel strangely adorned with his tail, which is his saving grace in human eyes. In the hotels the air is buttered, and the whole air is volatilized beefsteak. Our poetry is an affectation, but read Chaucer and the old lays in which Merlin and Arthur are celebrated, and you will find it as simple as the speech of children. What awe would not the smallest exaltation of the intellectual processes awaken, as we see in Safford or Colburn's case, and the unproved pretensions of somnambulists? The boy Merlin laughs 3 times, and in each instance because he foresees or second sees what is future or distant. We are always on the edge of this, but cannot quite fetch it. X and Y and so many honest bourgeois in our population vote on the expectation and assurance of a specific reward. It is as honest and natural in them to expect the place, as in an ox to expect his hay and stalks, and they are as legitimately angry and implacable if they are balked of it. This is the true Wilde, the henologist in Horsa, unchristianized still in so many ages. The same brutish naivete appears in all their story, in their family quarrels on wills, etc. Nature trains us on to see illusions and prodigies. Channing thinks it the woe of life that natural effects are continually crowded out and artificial arrangements substituted. He remembers when an evening, any evening, grim and wintry like this, was enough for him. The houses were in the air; now it takes a very cold winter night to overcome the common and mean. And this, no doubt, as we agreed, is the poet's state. As long as the evening is sufficient, as long as the youth is in the capability of being emparadized by the sights and sounds of common day, he is poet. But as soon as he begins to use them well, knows how to parse and spell, turn artist, he ceases to be poet. I used to value Newton's theory of transparency, that transparent bodies were homogeneous, and the ray entering, being attracted equally in every direction, was as if it were not attracted at all, and passed directly through, but opaque were heterogeneous, and the ray, being drawn this way and that way, was diverted and did not traverse. I think it is so with books. Cram people with your books, furnish them with a constant river of books and journals, and you may be sure they will remember as little as if they had read none. The laws, the statute book, are only the wishes of the majority of the people. There will be great deduction to be made for the performance. Just so much private volition as there is makes the reliable force of the law. Laws. I see no security in laws, but only in the nature of men, and in that reactive force which develops all kinds of energy at the same time, energy of good with energy of evil, the ecstasies of devotion with the exasperations of debauchery. The sons of Democrats will be Whigs, and the fury of republicanism in the father is only the immense effort of the nature to engender an intolerable tyrant in the next age. November 9th. The Whig party are what people would call first rate in opposition, but not so good in government. Perhaps they have not sufficient fortitude. The same thing happens often in England. Here has passed an election, I think the most dismal ever known in this country. 3 great parties voting for 3 candidates whom they disliked. Next Monday there will be more heart. Van Buren? Taylor? Quote, "Sister Lucy," said the lady, "how do you enjoy your mind lately? I have put up a great many petitions for you." Quote, "Why, I don't expect much enjoyment," said the other, who was quilling skeins. "I have such a bad heart." In Plato's Republic, Book 3, see a sentence which might be an introduction to a friendly biography of Alcott. Quote, "We must seek for those who are to supply us with the forms of art, men who by instinct can trace out the springs of grace and beauty, that dwelling as in a sanctuary of health, the young may imbibe good from all around them, from every work and sight and sound whence aught may strike their sense, like airs that are wafting health from purest climes, and step by step from childhood, and changing them into the image of goodness, and into likeness and love and harmony with the beauty of truth." Quote, "It was the peculiar genius of the Athenian to anticipate. Before the orator had finished his first clause, they could tell the end." Thucydides. Novels. Heliodorus, Christian bishop, in his Aethiopica containing Theagenes and Chariclea, is the founder of novels. From this source comes the romance of the Middle Ages and the modern novel. See Sewell's Plato, page 154. Dr. Johnson said he always went into stately shops. In the best circles is the best information, as I thought when I found what I had wanted in Wickham's Life. You can get phosphate from cow dung, but better from bones. Oxygen best from Conferva rivularis. It is one convenience of culture that it has no enemies. The finished man of the world holds his hatred also at arm's length, so that he can, whenever is fit occasion, receive his foe with all the world at his house, and associate with him in public or in private affairs unencumbered by old quarrel. But country people are like dogs and cows that quarrel, and remember their spite. William of Wykeham quarrelled with the Duke of Lancaster. All Wykeham's temporalities were sequestered, and he excluded from Parliament. William managed to get all back, and the Duke was for the time worsted. It does not hinder that the Duke should be solemnly received at William's College at Oxford on the Visitation. This fast and loose belongs to the intellect, belongs to that power of detachment which the intellect introduces. The other lesson I learned in Wykeham's life was certainly a confirmation of my respect for the solidity of English national genius. What men that isle yields! What gravity, what liberality and nobleness! What tenacity of purpose! What lofty religion! Here is a man so allied to the material world that he is sure to become rich and great under any government and times, and whose aims are so public and disinterested that he can easily be prudent and not too much mixed with bad politics, though by greatness of nature he must necessarily be mixed with great men and affairs. He is a man of the Washington type, and it is by many such men as Wykeham that England is great and free. Ah, these fine solitudes around me in Massachusetts could easily become dear and enviable to the human race, if once they were the homes of grave, religious, forcible men. Englishmen. I went to England to know who were the excellent men of that country. Some of them I know personally, some only by name. Wordsworth, Landor, Carlyle, Tennyson, Wilkinson, Stevenson, Hallam, Faraday, Owen, Edward Forbes, Samuel Brown, De Quincey, David Scott, P.J. Bailey, J.S. Mill, Arthur H. Clow, W. Sewell, James Moseley, Henry Taylor, Edwin Chadwick, Duke of Wellington, Robert Peel, Richard Cobden, Robert Browning, Matthew Arnold, John Bright. All these I have seen except Chadwick, Browning, Taylor, and Sewell and Moseley. What difference in the hospitality of minds! Some are actually hostile and imprison me as in a hole. A blockhead makes a blockhead of me, whilst for my Oriental friend here I have always claimed for him that nothing could be so expansive as his element is. My friends begin to value each other, now that Alcott is to go, and Ellery declares, quote, that he never saw that man without being cheered, and Henry says, quote, he is the best-natured man I ever met. The rats and mice make their nests in him. Apples. The apple is our national fruit, and I like to see that the soil yields it. I judge of the country so. The American sun paints himself in these glowing balls amid the green leaves. Man would be more solitary, less veined, less supported if the land yielded only the useful maize and potato, withheld this ornamental and social fruit. I have planted a pumpkin sweeting near my summer house, I believe out of agreeable recollection of that fruit in my childhood at Newton. It grew in Mr. Greenall's pasture, and I thought it solid sunshine. Quote, ere boyhood with quick glance had ceased to spy the doubtful apple mid the yellow leaves. There are always a few heads, and out of these come the mythology and the machinery of the world. Whence came all these books, laws, inventions, parties, kingdoms? Out of the invisible world, through a few brains, and if we should pierce to the origin of knowledge, explore the meaning of memory, we might find it some strange mutilated roll of papyrus, on which only a strange, disjointed jumble of universal traditions, of heavenly scriptures, of angelic biographies, were long ago written, relics of a foreworld. Midsummer. 'Tis very certain that this almanac of the soul may be written as well as that of Greenwich. We have had our heights of sun and depths of shade, and it would be easy in the soul's year to recall and fix its 21st of June. Moses had his 10 commandments, but we have ours. In the first age they wrote on stone, and what was fit to be written on stone. Lycurgus his laws, Moses his decalogue, but we write novels and newspapers. You would not have Bulwer and Disraeli publish their novel on stone. There is a sort of climate in every man's speech, running from hot noon, when words flow like steam and perfume, to cold night, when they are frozen. We must accept a great deal as fate. We accept it with protest, merely adjourning our experiment, and not squander our strength in upheaving mountains. Mountain is conquerable also, to be sure, but whilst you cannot quarry it, let it be a mountain. Action and idea are man and woman, both indispensable. Why should they rail at and exclude each other? Yes, we must call the anatomist and physiologist to counsel. The human body is undoubtedly the true symbol, true and highest and most instructive, human body and not sun or galaxy. Teutonic. I still return, or did last night, to the eulogy of those natural priests who, in every condition of life, have yielded us some token of having read the laws of heaven, beginning as usual with my poor churl Tarbox at Newton. These are the small Baymans, or the Teutonic school, and one farmer or laborer of that sort is worth whole towns full of plausible farmers, traders, and selectmen. It is the outcropping of the granite which is the core of the world. I seem to meet no more such. Very and Rebecca Black were the last, and yet perhaps Herman knows something. In England how few, and yet there was Sylvester and Fletcher and Sutton and David Scott. In every family a system settles itself. November 14th. 'Tis the coldest November I have ever known. This morning the mercury is at 26. Yesterday afternoon, cold, fine ride with Ellery to Sudbury Inn, and mounted the side of Knobscot. Finest picture through wintry air of the russet Massachusetts. The landscape is democratic, not gathered into one city or baronial castle, but equally scattered into these white steeples, round which a town clusters in every place where 6 roads meet, or where a river branches or falls, or where the pan of soil is a little deeper. The horizon line marched by hills tossing like waves in a storm, firm indigo line. 'Tis a pretty revolution which is effected in the landscape by simply turning your head upside down, or looking through your legs, and infinite softness and loveliness is added to the picture. It changes the landscape at once from November to June, or as Ellery declared, makes Campania of it at once. So he said Massachusetts is Italy upside down. November 26th. Yesterday walked over Lincoln Hills with Ellery and saw golden willows, savins with 2 foliages, old chestnuts, apples as ever. I understand Dr. Charles T. Jackson that a piece of ordnance may usually be fired 1,000 times before it will burst, and only so many times, that it is the rule in the United States service that 1 piece of each new kind of firearm should be burst, and that Jenks' rifle was fired by a sergeant and man appointed to that service 66,000 times, when last heard from, and was not yet burst. The doctor described the wonderful mirage of Lake Superior, and the aurora borealis, and the analyzed sounds. The air in the woods at 100, the water at 38. The osars, or horsebacks, so familiar in our woods, are made, he says, by the combing of the waves. A robin says Agassiz, embryonic, is a gull is a duck is a fish. Add now what I suppose is omitted, then there's an untranslated Latin phrase, that a man is a robin, and the chain is perfect, a man is a fish. It is not for nothing that very few heads are sent into the world busy with abstractions, and very many heads busy with making money. Accept the order of the world, though it make you a shopkeeper. That is one thing. The second thing which comes often to mind lately is the conviction that our security is in the reactive force which develops all kinds of energy out of the same time. December 10th. Henry Thoreau is still falling on some bold volunteer like his Dr. Heaton, who discredits the regulars, but Henry, like all the rest of sensible men, when he is sick, will go to Jackson and Warren. T. W. Higginson at Newburyport urged the establishment of such a journal as the Dial for the comfort and encouragement of young men, who, but for that paper, had felt themselves lonely and unsupported in the world. Punch notices that in the late hard times Saturn has lately appeared without his rings, and that the other planets openly accuse him of having palmed them. Nature. The earth takes the part of her children so quickly and adopts our thoughts, affections, and quarrels. The schoolboy finds every step of the ground on his way to school acquainted with his quarrel and smartly expressing it. The ground knows so well his top and ball. The air itself is full of hoop time, ball time, swimming, sled, and skates. So ductile is the world. The rapt prophet finds it not less facile and intelligent. 'Tis Pentecost all. The rose speaks all languages, the sense of all affections. Parthians, Jews, Mesopotamians, Greeks, French, English. The girl finds her chamber enchanted, and all her walks with the dear dream. Courage of Archimedes. If he had courage of heart, he would be a gone Archimedes. It is by pounding on his problem, by being pure brain, that he suffers the soldier to kill him without a pang. Fate in the mixture of the children, one having life in, the other life outside herself. The best antidote to fortune is the religious determination. Fate, fate. Well, settle this then. The nobility of the sentiments is in resting that or in accepting it. Here is a blessed piece of realism from George Sand's Joyner Pierre. and then it is an untranslated section from that novel in French. December 22nd. Directly on the dreadful calamity of young George Emerson's death comes to me one of my highest prosperities. I received Clow's poem at the bookstore whilst pondering the dare or dare not of a visit to Pemberton Square. 'Tis, I think, the most real benefit I have had from my English visit, this genius of Clow. How excellent, yet how slow to show itself! He gave no hint of all this to me, and I learned to esteem him for reticent sense, for solidity and tenacity, after he had given proof of his apprehensiveness and of this thorough Oxford culture, which was manifest enough. An Oxonian is a kind of nobleman, of course. Then he had had that interest in life and realities, in the state of woman, and the questions so rife in Paris through communism and through the old loose and easy conventions of that city for travelers. He talked so considerately of the Grisset estate that I found him the best piece de resistance and tough adherence that one could desire. But I never surmised that this flowing, all-applicable expression belonged to him. Where had he concealed it? And now Tennyson must look to his laurels, and now I have a new friend, and the world has a new poet. Tests. Have you given any words to the current coin of the country? Carlyle has. What all men think, he thinks better. Carlyle is thought a bad writer. Is he? Wherever you find good writing, in Dorian or Rabelaisian or Norse sagas or English Bible or Cromwell himself, 'tis odd you find resemblance to his style. The Edda. Where there is a common language between the authors and the mob, quote, the intellectuality of the educated class works down, to use Lang's word. He says, quote, no sentiment, phrase, popular idea, or expression from the works of Lessing, Goethe, Schiller, Richter, or any other German writer is ever heard among the lower classes in Germany, because of the wide difference between their Platt Deutsch and the written language. I should say that in English only those sentences stand which are good both for the scholar and the cabman. Latin and Saxon half and half, perfectly Latin and perfectly English. Iceland was civilized and learned. Thence came the Skalds. What New England is to the south, that was Iceland to Norway. The Christian Iceland fitted out no Viking expeditions, but young Icelanders sometimes joined the Northmen's. So Massachusetts and Rhode Island fit out no slave trade, yet the Deewolfs go. Rise of Hanseatic League and wealth of west of Europe extinguished these pests of Vikings, quote, and Skald fell before the clerk with his pen and ink, as Viking before English trade, and as stagecoach before railroad. This is the end of Journal Collection number 39 by Ralph Waldo Emerson, dating from the year 1848, when the author was 45 years old. This is also the end of Volume 7 of the 10-volume collection of Emerson's journals. Thank you for listening.